It was a Saturday evening, one of those quiet nights that seemed to blur into the others. Amelia was sitting across from me, a glass of wine in hand, scrolling through her phone with a faint smile on her face. 7 years of marriage, and we had settled into a rhythm so predictable it felt like autopilot. She glanced up, giving me a soft smile, and I returned it. But inside, my thoughts were tangled in a different direction. My phone buzzed with a message, and I casually glanced down at the screen. The name that appeared made my pulse quicken: Sarah. It had been months since I'd last heard from my stepsister. Sarah and I had grown up together, but after we'd both moved away, life had taken us in different directions. I hadn't thought about her in years, but here she was, out of nowhere, sending me a message that was simple, yet strangely personal. "Hey, big brother. Been a while. How's life?" I felt Amelia's gaze on me, her brows lifting as she noticed my expression. I quickly forced a casual smile. "It's Sarah," I said, keeping my tone light. "She's just saying hi." Amelia's face softened. "It's been a long time since I've seen her. You two were always so close, weren't you?" "Yeah, we were," I replied, my thoughts already drifting back to those years. Memories surfaced, Sarah and I running down the beach as teenagers, sitting up late talking about everything and nothing, our shared secrets and stolen moments of laughter. She had been my best friend once, before the complications of adulthood and the miles between us changed things. I found myself typing a quick response, my fingers hesitating slightly over the keys before I pressed send. As the days passed, Sarah and I started messaging more frequently. What had begun as a simple catch-up turned into something deeper. She told me about her job, her recent move to a new city, her struggle to find a place that felt like home. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't in years, sharing my own frustrations, my dissatisfaction with the endless routines, the responsibilities that felt like chains. It was so easy, so familiar, and it wasn't long before her messages started arriving at odd hours. Late at night, early in the morning, times when only close friends or something else would be in contact. Each message sent a small thrill through me, a reminder of something I couldn't quite name but felt keenly in my chest. One night, as I lay in bed beside Amelia, my phone lit up with another message from Sarah. My heart raced as I glanced at it, seeing the words that left me frozen. "I miss the old days. Do you ever think about them?" I typed back, my fingers shaking slightly. All the time, there was a pause before her response came, and when it did, it was like a door opening, leading to a place I knew I shouldn't go. Sometimes I wish things had turned out differently for us. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange combination of excitement and fear. I knew I shouldn't be having these thoughts, shouldn't be feeling this way. But the thrill of it, the danger, it was like a fire spreading slowly, impossible to contain. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about her message. I tried to distract myself, focusing on work, on the routine tasks that usually filled my mind. But every free moment, every pause in the day, my thoughts drifted back to Sarah, to the words she had sent, the unspoken invitation that lingered between us. That evening, I was sitting on the couch with Amelia, who was engrossed in a new book she'd been talking about for weeks. She looked so peaceful, so trusting, and a pang of guilt hit me hard. I told myself it was just nostalgia, just a harmless conversation between two people who had once been close. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. My phone buzzed again, and I felt my heart skip. I glanced at Amelia, who hadn't noticed, then opened the message. "I'm coming to town next week. Want to catch up?" The invitation hung there, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. I knew the right answer, knew that meeting her would be a mistake. But the part of me that craved something different, something exciting, couldn't resist. "Yeah," I typed back. "Let's catch up." The following week felt like a countdown. I went through my usual routines, work, dinner with Amelia, the quiet nights at home. But underneath it all, a different kind of anticipation was building. Sarah and I continued to message each other, the conversations growing more personal, more intense. She asked questions that felt both innocent and loaded. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different between us? Do you miss the way we used to talk? The way you'd tell me things you'd never tell anyone else?" Her words were like kindling, each one adding fuel to a fire I couldn't put out. And with each message, I felt myself slipping further, the line between nostalgia and something forbidden blurring until I could barely see it. The day of our meeting arrived, and I found myself feeling nervous, like a teenager on his first date. I told Amelia I had a meeting after work, something casual, something she wouldn't question. I could see the trust in her eyes, the easy acceptance of my words, and guilt gnawed at me. But the thrill of the secret drowned it out. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, a place where no one would recognize us. Sarah was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, her gaze distant as she watched the street outside. When she saw me, her face lit up with a smile, and I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in years. "Hey, big brother," she said, standing to hug me, her arms wrapped around me. And for a moment, I was lost in the familiar warmth, the scent of her perfume, the softness of her touch. It was only a second, but it lingered between us, heavy and charged. We sat down, ordered coffee, and began to talk. At first, it was simple, small talk, memories, laughter that felt both familiar and strangely new. But as the conversation went on, the space between us seemed to shrink, the words carrying an unspoken tension that neither of us addressed. At one point, Sarah reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. I felt a spark, a jolt of something I couldn't ignore, and for a second, I was paralyzed, caught between wanting to pull away and wanting to hold on. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I feel like we never really got the chance to explore what we could have been. Do you ever feel that way?" My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to deny it, to say that it was all in the past, that we were different people now. But instead, I found myself nodding, unable to tear my gaze from hers. "I do," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I feel it all the time." The words were out before I could stop them, and I knew, in that moment, that there was no turning back. The line we'd crossed was one we could never uncross. And as I looked in her eyes, I felt a thrill, a rush that drowned out every other thought. The evening after my meeting with Sarah, I felt a strange exhilaration coursing through me, mingled with a deep sense of guilt. When I came home, I found Amelia sitting on the couch, curled up in a blanket with her favorite novel. She looked up at me and smiled, and the guilt hit me like a wave, threatening to pull me under. "Hey, how was your meeting?" she asked, her eyes warm and trusting. I forced a smile, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "It was fine, just the usual work stuff." She reached out, taking my hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. "Glad you're home." Her fingers lingered on mine, soft and familiar. And for a moment, I felt a pang of longing for the simplicity of what we once had. But behind the longing was something darker, a thrill that wouldn't let go. That night, as Amelia drifted off to sleep beside me, I lay awake, replaying every moment of my meeting with Sarah. Her smile, the feel of her hand brushing mine, the way she looked at me with that familiar warmth. I knew I was standing on the edge of something dangerous, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from leaning closer, tempted by the pull of the unknown. The next morning, I woke up feeling a mixture of excitement and dread. The thrill of the previous night lingered, but so did the weight of guilt. As I dressed for work, Amelia sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine and sipping her coffee. She looked so peaceful, so content, and I found myself wondering how I could betray her trust so easily. But the memory of Sarah's touch lingered, and as I left for work, I couldn't help but glance at my phone, hoping for a message from her. I didn't have to wait long. Just after lunch, my phone buzzed with a text. "I can't stop thinking about last night. Can you meet again?" My heart raced as I read her words. Part of me wanted to say no, to pull back before it was too late. But another part, a part that felt like it had been dormant for years, wanted to say yes. I hesitated, staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys. Finally, I typed a reply. "Tonight. Same place." That evening, I found myself driving to the same cafe where we'd met before, my thoughts swirling with anticipation and guilt. I told myself it was just coffee, just another conversation, but Deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something between us, something I couldn't ignore, something that was pulling me in despite every warning sign. When I arrived, Sarah was already there, sitting by the window, her gaze distant as she watched the world outside. She looked up as I approached, and her face broke into a smile that sent a shiver through me. "Hey," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "Hey," I replied, taking a seat across from her. The cafe was quiet, the soft hum of conversation and clinking of cups filling the air. We ordered coffee, but neither of us touched it. Instead, we sat there in silence, the unspoken tension between us growing with each passing second. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I don't know what's happening here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I feel like I can't stop." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know. I feel it too." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine, and I felt a surge of emotion I hadn't felt in years, a mixture of longing and fear, excitement and guilt. Her touch lingered, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else, Amelia, the consequences, the line I was crossing. "Sometimes," Sarah said softly, her gaze locked on mine, "I feel like we missed out on something important. Like we never really got the chance to see what we could have been." Her words sent a chill through me, and I realized that she was voicing the thoughts I hadn't dared to admit to myself. There was a part of me, a part I'd kept hidden for years, that felt the same way. And in that moment, sitting across from her in the quiet cafe, I knew that I couldn't turn back. "I don't know where this is going," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But I don't want to stop." Her eyes softened, and she gave me a small, sad smile. "Neither do I." We sat there in silence, the weight of our choices pressing down on us, the thrill of the forbidden hanging heavy in the air. And as I looked into her eyes, I knew that we were standing on the edge of something that could destroy everything, but I couldn't bring myself to pull away. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Every time I was with Amelia, I felt the weight of my deception pressing down on me, a constant reminder of the line I had crossed. She noticed the change, the distance I was putting between us, and I could see the worry in her eyes, the silent questions she didn't dare to ask. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, Amelia looked at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "Are you okay? You seem distracted lately." I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, just work's been busy, I guess." She studied me for a moment, her gaze searching, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she reached over, taking my hand in hers, her touch warm and comforting. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt a surge of guilt so intense that it nearly took my breath away. Here she was, offering me her trust, her love, and all I could think about was Sarah, the messages, the meetings, the thrill of the forbidden. "I know," I said softly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Thank you." She smiled, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. And in that moment, I hated myself for what I was doing. But the pull of Sarah, the excitement, the danger, it was too strong to resist. It wasn't long before Sarah and I met again. This time, it was at a park on the outskirts of town, a quiet place where we could talk without worrying about being seen. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the trees. And as we walked together, I felt a strange sense of peace, as if I was exactly where I was meant to be. At one point, we stopped by a bench, and Sarah turned to face me, her expression serious. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. My heart sank. "What do you mean?" She looked down, her fingers twisting together. I hate lying to everyone. To you, to myself." She took a deep breath, looking up at me with a mixture of fear and longing. "But I also can't stop. I don't want to stop." I felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of relief and despair. "Neither do I," said softly. "But I don't know how to make this work. I don't know what we're supposed to do." She reached out, her hand resting on mine, and I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. "I just need to know, do you feel the same way? Do you feel something real?" I met her gaze, my heart pounding. I knew what she was asking, and I knew that my answer would change everything. "Yes," I whispered, my voice filled with conviction. I feel it too. In that moment, it was as if nothing else mattered. The world around us faded, leaving only the two of us standing on the edge of something we couldn't control. And as I looked into her eyes, I knew that we were in too deep, that there was no turning back. Back home, I did my best to hide the guilt, the secrets, but Amelia was starting to notice. She was watching me more closely, her questions becoming sharper, more pointed. "Who are you texting all the time?" she asked one night, her voice light, but her gaze intense. "Just work stuff," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she lingered on me, as if searching for a clue to a question she didn't want to ask. As the days went on, the tension between us grew, an unspoken rift that I could feel widening with each passing day. I knew that she could sense something, that she was beginning to see through the cracks in my facade. But I couldn't stop, couldn't bring myself to end the affair with Sarah, no matter how much I wanted to. And with each passing day, the weight of my choices grew heavier, the thrill of the forbidden darkening into something more dangerous, more consuming. It had become a delicate balancing act, this secret life I was living. Days with Amelia were filled with routine, the unspoken tension building between us. Nights and hidden moments were consumed by Sarah. And yet, the cracks were starting to show. One evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling mindlessly through my phone, Amelia sat down beside me, her expression unreadable. She glanced at me, hesitating as though weighing her words. "I've been thinking," she began softly, her tone careful. "Maybe we should take a trip. Just the two of us, to reconnect." Her eyes searched mine, and I could see the worry there, the quiet desperation. My stomach twisted. A trip? Alone with her? With no escape? No way to reach Sarah? The thought filled me with both dread and guilt. I forced a smile, reaching for her hand. "That sounds nice," I replied, though my voice sounded hollow to my own ears. We'll find time." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes, the flicker of sadness that she tried to hide behind a forced smile. "I just feel like you're slipping away," she whispered, barely audible. My chest tightened. "Amelia, I'm here," I said, squeezing her hand. But the words felt like a lie, and I knew that she could sense it. She gave me a small, resigned smile. "I hope so," she murmured before standing up and walking into the bedroom, leaving me alone with the weight of my choices pressing down on me. The following week, I received a message from Sarah that filled me with both excitement and fear. "I can't keep this a secret anymore. I want to see you." Without hiding, the words hit me like a punch. She was right. We were living in the shadows, hiding from the world, from ourselves. But the idea of coming clean, of facing the consequences, terrified me. I knew that once this was out in the open, there would be no going back. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, torn between the life I had built with Amelia and the feelings I couldn't deny for Sarah. That evening, as I sat in the quiet of our home, Amelia's voice broke the silence. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone gentle but concerned. "You've seemed distant lately, more than usual." I looked up at her, my heart aching with guilt. She was watching me with such trust, such love, and I felt a surge of shame. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just work stress." She nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. I knew she could sense the distance, the barrier that had grown between us. And yet, she continued to trust me, to give me the benefit of the doubt. The weight of that trust felt crushing, like a burden I couldn't carry. It wasn't long before things came to a head. Sarah and I met one evening in a secluded spot at the park, hidden away from prying eyes. The night was quiet, the air thick with the unspoken tension between us. "I can't keep doing this," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep lying, hiding. I want more than stolen moments." I swallowed, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. "I know," I replied, my voice trembling. "But what about everything else? What about Amelia?" She looked away, her expression conflicted. "Do you still love her?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I hesitated, searching for an answer that felt true, but nothing came. Instead, all I could think about was the thrill, The connection I felt with Sarah, a connection that felt real in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I don't know, I admitted finally, my voice barely audible. I just, I don't know. Sarah's face softened, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. I don't want to be your secret, Caleb. I want us to be real. Her words hit me with a force I hadn't expected, and I felt my resolve crumbling. I knew she was right, knew that this double life was unsustainable. But the fear of losing everything, of hurting Amelia, it was paralyzing. I can't make that choice, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Not yet. She nodded slowly, her gaze distant. Then maybe we need to take some time, she said softly. Until you know what you want. The words felt like a dagger to my chest, but I knew she was right. I was standing on the edge of a decision that would change everything, and I needed to be sure. Back at home, things between Amelia and me grew colder, more strained. She began noticing the small details, the late nights, the way I'd glance at my phone, the moments of distraction when I was supposed to be present. One evening, as we were sitting down to dinner, she looked at me, her gaze piercing. Is there someone else? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words felt false, empty. Instead, I shook my head, forcing a smile. Of course not, Amelia. Don't be silly. She nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering in her eyes, the quiet sadness that seemed to grow with each passing day. I knew I was hurting her, knew that she could sense the distance, even if she didn't know the reason. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to end things with Sarah, no matter how much it tore me apart. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the line I had crossed, the life I was jeopardizing. And with each passing day, the weight of my choices grew heavier, the thrill of the forbidden turning into something darker, something more consuming. One night, as I lay awake beside Amelia, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. I glanced at the screen, my heart pounding as I read her words. I need to see you. I can't keep pretending this isn't real. I stared at the message, feeling a mixture of excitement and dread. I knew that meeting her again would mean stepping further into the unknown, risking everything I had. But the pull was too strong, too intoxicating to resist. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Amelia, and made my way to the door. The house was silent. The only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. As I left, a sense of finality settled over me, a feeling that whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. I met Sarah at the edge of town, at a small cafe that was nearly empty. She was waiting for me, her face pale, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. We sat down, the silence between us thick with anticipation. I can't keep doing this, she said softly, her voice trembling. I need to know if we have a future, or if this is just something you'll walk away from. Her words cut through me, and I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me, a reminder of the life I was risking, the trust one was betraying. I want this, I replied, my voice barely more than a whisper. But I don't know how to make it work. She looked away, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Then maybe you need to figure that out, she said softly. Because I can't keep being your secret. I can't keep pretending that I don't want more. The words hung in the air, a final plea that left me feeling hollow, torn between the life I had built and the life I wanted. As we sat there in silence, I knew that I was standing on the edge of a decision that would change everything, that whatever I chose, there would be no turning back. The weight of my choices was suffocating. Days blurred together, filled with stolen glances at my phone, guilty thoughts, and the constant feeling of being caught between two worlds. Sarah had become an obsession, her texts and calls a reminder of something I both feared and craved. Meanwhile, Amelia grew more distant, her once warm smiles now tainted with suspicion and sadness. I was unraveling, and I could feel it in every fiber of my being. One evening, as I sat across the dinner table from Amelia, I noticed how quiet she'd become. She picked at her food, her gaze drifting off into the distance. I could tell she had something on her mind, something heavy, but she hadn't said a word. Finally, she looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "Caleb, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "Of course, I am," I said, my voice sounding unconvincing even to myself. "Why wouldn't I be?" She shrugged, her gaze dropping back to her plate. "I don't know. You've just seemed different lately. Like you're somewhere else." Her voice was soft, filled with worry and hurt. "I feel like I don't know you anymore." A wave of guilt crashed over me, and I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Amelia, I'm sorry. Things have just been complicated, but I love you. I do." She gave me a small, sad smile, but the doubt in her eyes remained. I knew that she could sense something was wrong, that the distance between us was growing, but she was trying to hold on, trying to salvage what was left. And yet, even as I held her hand, my thoughts drifted to Sarah, to the thrill of our secret, the forbidden connection that I couldn't bring myself to break. The next day, while I was at work, I received a message from Sarah. It was simple but loaded with meaning. "We need to talk." I felt a surge of anxiety. Sarah's messages had grown more urgent lately, her patience wearing thin. She wanted answers, wanted something real, but I was paralyzed by indecision, unable to choose between the comfort of my life with Amelia and the fire that Sarah had reignited in me. After work, I met Sarah at a quiet bar on the edge of town. She was sitting in a corner booth, her face pale, her eyes searching as she looked up at me. "Caleb," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I can't keep doing this. Hiding, lying, pretending that this is enough. I need to know if there's a future for us, or if I'm just wasting my time." Her words hit me hard, and I felt a surge of panic. I didn't want to lose her, didn't want to give up the thrill, the connection that felt more real than anything I'd experienced in years. But I couldn't imagine a life without Amelia, the life we had built together, the routines, the familiarity. "Sarah, I don't know what to say," I whispered, my voice choked with guilt and fear. "I feel something for you, something I can't explain, but I can't just throw everything away." She looked down, her hands trembling as she twisted them together. "Then maybe you need to figure out what you want," she said softly, her voice filled with pain. "Because I can't keep being your secret. I deserve more than that." I reached for her hand, desperate to keep her close, but she pulled away, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Caleb. I can't do this anymore." She stood up, leaving me alone in the booth, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I knew that I was losing her, that my indecision was driving her away. And yet, as I sat there in the quiet bar, I felt trapped, caught between two lives, unable to choose a path that wouldn't destroy everything. The tension at home continued to build. Amelia's suspicions grew, her questions more pointed, her eyes filled with a quiet pain that I couldn't ignore. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I felt her gaze on me, and when I looked over, I saw a mixture of sadness and anger in her eyes. "Caleb," she began, her voice trembling, "is there something you're not telling me?" My heart raced, and I forced a casual smile. "What do you mean?" She sighed, her expression hardening. "I'm not stupid. I know when something's wrong. You've been different, distant, and I can't keep pretending that everything's okay." I looked away, guilt twisting in my stomach. "Amelia, I don't know what to say. Things have just been complicated lately." She shook her head, her face filled with disappointment. "Complicated? That's all you have to say? Do you think I haven't noticed the late nights, the way you're always checking your phone, the look in your eyes when you think I'm not watching?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt a surge of panic. She knew, maybe not everything, but enough to sense that something was wrong. And in that moment, I realized that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from losing everything. "Amelia, I love you," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't want to hurt you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and anger. "Then tell me the truth, Caleb. Whatever it is, I can handle it. But I can't handle this silence, this distance." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was too heavy, too painful, and I knew that once I said it, there would be no going back. Instead, I sat there in silence, the weight of my choices pressing down on me, and I saw the moment her face crumbled, her heart breaking in front of me. Without another word, she stood up and walked into the bedroom, leaving me alone in the dark, drowning in my guilt. In the days that followed, Amelia became more withdrawn, her once warm and open demeanor replaced by a cold distance. She barely spoke to me, barely looked at me, and I knew that the walls I had built between us were now insurmountable. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. I stared at the screen, her name a reminder of everything I had sacrificed, everything I had destroyed. The message was short, but it cut through me like a knife. I miss you. I still want us to be real. Please don't leave me. My heart ached, torn between the life I had with Amelia and the life I wanted with Sarah. I knew that I couldn't keep living this double life, couldn't keep lying to the people I cared about. But the thought of losing either of them was unbearable. As I sat there, staring at my phone, I realized that I had reached the breaking point, that the choices I had made, the lines I had crossed, had led me to a place from which there was no escape. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decisions settle over me. I knew that whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling a sense of dread that settled in my chest like a stone. Amelia was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in her hands, staring out the window. "Amelia," I began, my voice shaking. "We need to talk." She looked up, her expression resigned, as though she had been waiting for this moment. "I'm listening," she said softly, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and expectation. I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. "I've made some mistakes," I admitted, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Things I'm not proud of. I've hurt you in ways I can't take back." She nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Is there someone else?" The question hung in the air, and I felt my chest tighten, the guilt overwhelming me. I looked down, unable to meet her eyes, and in that moment, I knew that the truth would destroy us, that there was no way to undo the damage I had caused. "Yes," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "There is someone else?" The silence that followed was deafening, and when I looked up, I saw the devastation in her eyes, the betrayal that I had inflicted upon her. She stood up, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Get out," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet fury. "I can't look at you right now. Just get out." I stood there, frozen, the weight of my choices pressing down on me, and I knew that I had lost everything, that the life I had built, the love I had taken for granted, was gone, shattered by my own actions. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of the life I had destroyed. The door clicked shut behind me, leaving me standing alone on the front porch, the weight of everything crashing down. The early morning air was cool and biting, but I barely felt it. Amelia's words echoed in my mind, the raw pain in her voice replaying over and over, cutting through me like a blade. "Get out." I hadn't just broken her heart. I'd shattered her trust, destroyed everything we'd built together over years of shared memories, laughter, and dreams. And for what? I'd sacrificed it all for something that now felt empty, hollow. As I walked down the steps and into the stillness of the street, I felt a strange numbness settle over me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't need to look to know it was Sarah. But the thrill that had once come with her name was gone, replaced by a bitter taste of regret. For the first time, I saw what I'd become, someone I couldn't even recognize. And now, I was left with nothing but the wreckage of my own making. I spent the next few days in a haze, holed up in a small hotel room on the edge of town, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. Amelia hadn't called, hadn't reached out, and I knew better than to try contacting her. She deserved space, time to process the truth. The guilt gnawed at me, twisting deeper with each passing hour. I thought about calling Sarah, about finding some solace in her presence, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Everything about the affair now felt tainted, a reminder of the destruction I'd caused. Instead, I spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision, every lie, wondering how I'd let things spiral so far out of control. And as I lay there, consumed by regret, I realized the irony of it all. What had once felt like freedom had become a prison, a cage of my own making. After nearly a week of silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I found myself driving back to the house, unsure of what I would say, what I could possibly do to make things right. I pulled into the driveway, the sight of the house filling me with a painful nostalgia. This place had once been my sanctuary, my home, but now it felt foreign, like I didn't belong there anymore. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. A moment later, Amelia opened it, her expression guarded, her eyes red-rimmed from what I could only imagine were endless nights of tears. "Caleb," she said, her voice flat, devoid of the warmth that had once defined it. "What are you doing here?" I needed to see you," I replied, my voice trembling. To try and explain, apologize. She looked away, her jaw tightening. "I don't think there's anything left to say, Caleb. You made your choice." The finality in her words sent a wave of despair through me, but I forced myself to keep talking. "Amelia, please. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I love you. I never stopped loving you." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Love? You don't do this to someone you love. You don't betray them, lie to them, make them feel worthless." Her voice cracked, and I could see the pain etched across her face, a pain that I had put there. "I don't expect you to forgive me," I said softly, my own voice thick with emotion. I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly." She closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping as though she were carrying a heavy weight. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Caleb," she whispered. "I don't know if I even want to try." I felt my chest tighten, the reality of her words settling over me. I had hoped foolishly that maybe there was a chance that we could somehow rebuild what I had destroyed. But I knew now that it was a fantasy, a dream I had no right to hold on to. Amelia looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "I need you to go," she said quietly. "I need time to figure out what I want, who I am, without you." The words hit me like a punch, but I nodded, knowing that this was the least I could do. I had taken so much from her, and now all I could do was leave her in peace. Without another word, I turned and walked away, the door closing softly behind me. And as I drove away, I felt the weight of my choices settle over me like a shroud, reminder of everything I had lost. The next day, I finally met with Sarah. She was waiting for me at the cafe where we'd had our first secret meeting, her face filled with anticipation and worry. But as I sat down across from her, I knew that whatever spark had once drawn us together was gone, replaced by a painful clarity. "Caleb," she began, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I'm so glad you came. I missed you." I pulled my hand away, the words catching in my throat. "Sarah, this has to end." Her face fell, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "What? What do you mean?" We can't keep doing this. It's over." The words were painful, but I knew they were necessary. I had to end this, had to find some way to start rebuilding, even if it meant starting from nothing. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "But I thought you loved me." I took a deep breath, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. "I thought I did too, but I see now that it was something else. An escape, a mistake." The words stung, but I saw a flicker of understanding in her gaze. She looked down, her shoulders slumping as the reality of it settled over her. "So, that's it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but this has destroyed everything. I can't keep running from my life. I need to try and fix what's left." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. "I understand," she murmured. I hope you find what you're looking for." With that, I stood up and walked away, leaving behind the last remnants of the life I had built on lies. And as I stepped out into the crisp air, I felt a strange sense of finality, a painful liberation that came with severing ties. Months passed, and slowly I began to rebuild. The days were lonely, the nights even more so, but I knew that this was the price I had to pay for my choices. Amelia had filed for divorce, and though the process was painful, I respected her decision, knowing that she deserved a chance at happiness without me. I heard through mutual friends that she was doing well, that she was slowly healing, finding new meaning in her life. And though it hurt to think of her moving on, I was glad for her. She deserved happiness, a piece that I had taken from her. As for me, I learned to live with the silence, to confront the emptiness I had once tried to escape. I spent my days working, rebuilding my relationships with family and friends, slowly piecing together a life that felt honest, even if it was solitary. And though I knew that I would never truly escape the shadow of my choices, I found a strange solace in the quiet, a sense of acceptance for the man I had become. It was a slow, painful process, but with time, I learned to live with the consequences, to face each day with a renewed sense of humility. In the end, I was left with the memories, the regrets, and a faint glimmer of hope that one day I might find forgiveness. Not from Amelia or even Sarah, but from myself.